When a young black teacher is found dead in a small Georgia town, officials rule it a suicide. But as his grieving sister begins digging into the truth, she uncovers a chilling web of racial hate, police cover-ups, and a community protecting its own, no matter the cost. Brunswick, Georgia wasn't the kind of town people thought about twice. Nestled in the heart of Glynn County, it looked like a postcard from the outside, Spanish moss hanging from ancient oak trees, kids riding bikes down sleepy streets, and church bells that rang every Sunday morning without fail. But beneath the charm was something darker. Whispers of the past lingered in the corners, in stories passed down in hushed tones at black dinner tables, in warnings never written but always understood. Darius Lee was one of the few who dared to challenge those whispers. At 28, he had returned to Brunswick after finishing college in Atlanta, determined to give back to the community that raised him. He became a high school teacher and quickly earned the love of his students. But it wasn't just his passion for teaching that stood out, it was his voice. He spoke up. Loudly. Calmly. Persistently. He led peaceful marches after the murder of George Floyd. He organized voter registration drives. He held town halls in church basements. And he wasn't afraid to name the systems and faces behind the racism that still clung to Brunswick like humidity in July. Not everyone appreciated that. When his body was discovered on a warm Monday morning in late September, hanging from a pecan tree in an abandoned orchard on the outskirts of town, the official statement came swiftly. Suicide. No signs of struggle, they said. Case closed before noon. The sheriff's department released a 2-paragraph press release, and by sunset, the local news had moved on to a story about a pumpkin patch opening early this year. But Maya Lee knew better. She was Darius's older sister, tough, sharp, and fiercely protective. She lived in Chicago, where she worked as a freelance investigative journalist. The last time she spoke to Darius, he had sounded tense, nervous. He told her about strange cars following him at night, about a note left on his windshield that simply read, "Enough." He didn't say much more, but Maya could hear it in his voice, fear. And now he was gone. She flew to Brunswick the next day. The air felt heavy the moment she stepped off the plane. At the funeral home, Darius lay in an open casket, dressed in his favorite gray suit. His students came in waves, some in uniform, others in hoodies and sneakers, all of them with red-rimmed eyes. They talked about how he used to bring his own money to buy school supplies. How he stayed after class for hours tutoring anyone who asked. How he never once raised his voice, even when he had every reason to. At the burial, an old woman whispered to Maya, "He was too good for this town." Maya didn't reply, but the words stayed with her. Later that day, she visited the site where his body was found. The orchard was private property, technically owned by a bank after a foreclosure years ago. The area was overgrown with weeds and silence. But the tree stood tall, its limbs stretching wide. Someone had already taken down the yellow police tape, but Maya could still see marks on the bark where the rope had been. Something didn't add up. Back at her motel, she pored over the official report. It was thin, almost insultingly so. No toxicology screen. No autopsy photos. No interviews with witnesses, because there weren't any, according to the report. It claimed Darius had parked his car nearby and walked to the orchard alone. It ignored the fact that his car keys and phone were missing. Maya made a list of questions. It kept getting longer. She went to the sheriff's office the next morning. Sheriff Clint Wallace had been in office for nearly 2 decades. His face was framed on the wall behind the reception desk, beside plaques and awards from the local Rotary Club. He agreed to see her, briefly. He was polite, at first. "We're all real sorry for your loss, Miss Lee," he said, without meeting her eyes. "Your brother was a good man." "Then why was his case closed in less than 24 hours? Maya asked. The room grew colder. "We followed the evidence," he replied. "There was no sign of foul play. No fingerprints, no rope tested, no interviews with neighbors. How is that following the evidence?" He sighed. "Look, I know this is hard. But sometimes people have struggles we don't see. Maybe even you didn't see them." Maya stood up. "He didn't kill himself. And I'm going to prove it." As she walked out, she noticed the officers in the hallway watching her. Not all of them with sympathy. She called her editor in Chicago and told him she was staying longer. She reached out to former students, community leaders, even Darius's neighbors. People were hesitant at first, but slowly, stories began to surface. Strange noises outside Darius's house. A truck that followed him home more than once. A missing dog he adored. And a protest sign, burned and torn, found near the edge of the orchard 2 days after his death. The town might have been ready to move on. But Maya wasn't. And the more she looked, the more it seemed that Brunswick had something to hide. Something ugly. Something dangerous. Something that began long before Darius died. And wasn't finished yet. Darius Lee's death was quickly ruled a suicide by the local authorities, but those closest to him knew something was terribly wrong. Maya Lee had begun to peel back the layers of a story the town was desperate to bury. She started by talking to the people who had seen Darius in his final days, hoping to uncover clues that the official investigation ignored or overlooked. Students from the high school spoke in hushed tones about the change they had noticed in their teacher. Once confident and outspoken, Darius had become cautious, almost fearful. One student recalled a night when Darius showed up to class with dark circles under his eyes, visibly shaken. "He said someone was watching him," the student said quietly. "He told me he was scared to walk home after dark." The fear was real, not imagined. Another student said Darius had confided about strange vehicles parked near his home, and how he often found tire tracks in his yard in the early mornings. It wasn't paranoia, it was stalking. Church members confirmed the same. Darius had become more withdrawn during the last few weeks. The pastor mentioned that Darius had been organizing a large peaceful demonstration in Brunswick against police violence and systemic racism. This wasn't just about teaching history in a classroom, it was about changing the present. The pastor also revealed that Darius had received threatening letters, typed, unsigned, and ominous, warning him to stop stirring trouble or face consequences. These letters had been brought to the attention of local police, but the investigation, if any, was minimal and inconclusive. As Maya dug deeper, she discovered a piece of physical evidence that disturbed her, a protest sign torn and partially burned, found discarded near the orchard where Darius's body had been found. It was a sign from the Black Lives Matter rally he had helped organize weeks before his death. The charred edges and ripped fabric suggested it was deliberately destroyed, as if someone wanted to erase the message and the messenger. When she requested any dashcam or bodycam footage from the night before Darius's death, the police told her no such footage existed. When pressed further, a vague explanation was offered: the cameras had malfunctioned or the footage had been lost due to a technical glitch. That explanation didn't hold water, especially for someone like Maya who had spent years chasing down missing evidence in other investigations. It felt like a deliberate cover-up. Word of Maya's probing spread through Brunswick. The town that had welcomed her with polite nods now greeted her with cold stares and whispered warnings. At night, her motel was circled by unfamiliar cars. She received anonymous calls with nothing but heavy breathing on the other end. One morning, an envelope slipped under her door contained a single sheet of paper with the word "Stop" written in jagged letters. The threats were subtle but clear: back off or face consequences. Despite the intimidation, Maya kept pushing. A former black officer who had left the department years ago after witnessing corruption reached out to her anonymously. He revealed the existence of a secret vigilante group active in the area for decades, white men who took it upon themselves to enforce their own version of justice. This group, he said, was deeply connected with the local police department, with members protected from scrutiny or prosecution. They operated in the shadows, their actions whispered about but rarely proven. The officer's words resonated with Maya. She thought of the timing, the threats, the rushed investigation. It wasn't just about one man's death, it was about a system designed to silence dissent and maintain control. She knew she was up against more than just indifference. She was facing a community willing to sacrifice one of its own to preserve a comfortable status quo. One day, while reviewing phone calls and texts she had recovered from Darius's phone, thanks to a sympathetic tech-savvy friend, Maya found messages that hinted at fear and suspicion in the days before his death. Darius wrote to a colleague, "They know where I'm going tonight. I'm scared, but I have to keep fighting." That night, he had been pulled over by two men in an unmarked truck near the edge of town. One was wearing a police badge. Darius had recorded part of the encounter on his phone before it mysteriously stopped working. Maya tried to obtain that recording from the police department, but again, she was stonewalled. No record of the traffic stop. No video. No official report. Just silence. Her online posts about these findings drew both support and hatred. Some locals applauded her bravery, while others accused her of stirring division and disrespecting the town's peace. Tensions escalated, dividing Brunswick into those who wanted the truth and those desperate to keep it buried. One night, after a community meeting where Maya spoke about justice and accountability, a group of men followed her car for miles. She managed to lose them, but the message was clear: some in Brunswick did not want her asking questions. The danger was real, but so was her resolve. The more Maya uncovered, the more she realized that Darius's death was not an isolated tragedy. It was a symptom of a long-standing disease: racism, corruption, and fear, that infected the very institution sworn to protect and serve. The missing footage, the silence of witnesses, the intimidation, all pointed toward a deeper conspiracy. She began connecting dots between this case and other suicides and unexplained deaths in the area over the past decade. Many involved black men whose cases had been quietly closed or dismissed. The same orchard where Darius was found had a dark history, rumored to be the site of an unsolved lynching decades earlier. No one talked about it openly, but in the shadows, the stories persisted. Maya knew that to bring justice for Darius, she would have to shine a light on these buried truths, no matter how dangerous or uncomfortable. The town was watching, waiting to see if she would back down. But she had already crossed a line. There was no going back. In Brunswick, the whispers had begun to grow louder. And with each passing day, the silence was breaking. The deeper Maya Lee delved into her brother Darius's death, the clearer it became that the official story was riddled with holes and intentional gaps. The missing evidence, the silenced witnesses, and the town's cold shoulder pointed to a systemic cover-up. But then, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Deputy Mike Pearson. Pearson was a young white officer who had joined the Glynn County Sheriff's Department just a few years earlier. He wasn't like the others. Quiet, reserved, and visibly uncomfortable with the culture around him, Mike had kept his head down, until now. After hearing about Maya's investigation through the grapevine, he reached out to her in secret, hoping to share information that could break the case wide open. Mike confirmed what Maya suspected but couldn't prove: Darius had indeed been pulled over by two men in an unmarked truck the night before his death. One of those men was wearing a badge, but not one officially assigned to the department. Mike said the other man was the sheriff's cousin, a well-known figure in the town with deep connections to the local power structure. This cousin had a reputation for intimidating black residents and was rumored to be involved with a violent vigilante group that operated beyond the law, enforcing their own twisted version of justice. Mike's revelation was chilling. He told Maya the department had body cam footage of the traffic stop, showing the encounter escalating rapidly, with threats made against Darius. But the footage was deleted from official servers. When Mike questioned this, he was warned off by higher-ups, told to forget what he saw if he wanted to keep his job. Fearing for his safety but determined to do the right thing, Mike secretly copied the footage before it was wiped and agreed to share it with Maya. She recorded their meeting on her phone, careful to protect his identity. This footage was explosive evidence that directly contradicted the sheriff's public statements and exposed a culture of impunity within the department. Leaking the footage to a trusted independent journalist was a calculated risk, but it paid off immediately. Within days, national media outlets descended on Brunswick, shining a harsh spotlight on a town that had long preferred the darkness. The story quickly went viral, igniting outrage across social media platforms and civil rights organizations. The hashtags #JusticeForDarius and #BrunswickTruth trended nationwide. The sheriff responded predictably: denial and defiance. At a hastily arranged press conference, he called the allegations lies and sensationalism, accusing Maya and the media of trying to tear the town apart. But his words rang hollow as more and more voices demanded accountability. Protesters gathered outside the sheriff's office, and calls for federal investigations grew louder. Meanwhile, Maya's life became increasingly precarious. Her motel room was broken into, her personal belongings rummaged through, and her laptop tampered with. Though nothing was stolen, the message was clear: she was being watched. Online, she faced a wave of harassment and doxing, her home address and family details leaked by anonymous accounts. But Maya refused to back down. The pressure also began to mount within the police department. Some officers whispered their support for Maya and Mike, while others warned them to stay silent. Mike faced internal investigations meant to intimidate him into recanting. Yet his conscience held firm, and he remained steadfast in his commitment to justice for Darius. As national attention intensified, a long-buried truth resurfaced: a decades-old lynching case involving another black man found hanging in the same orchard where Darius's body was discovered. That case, like Darius's, had been ruled a suicide and quickly closed, but rumors and old newspaper clippings suggested otherwise. The orchard had become a grim symbol of racial violence and unresolved injustice. Maya connected with historians and civil rights activists to bring this past case back into the light. She uncovered witness statements, photographs, and court documents suppressed or forgotten by the town's authorities. The pattern was unmistakable: the orchard was not just a place of death but a site of terror used to intimidate and silence black residents for generations. The growing exposure forced federal agencies to open an official investigation into both the lynching of Darius Lee and the historical case. The FBI dispatched agents to Brunswick, promising an impartial inquiry that local authorities had failed to conduct. This marked a turning point, a crack in the wall of silence and denial. In the weeks that followed, more whistleblowers came forward, revealing how evidence had been deliberately destroyed, reports fabricated, and witnesses pressured into silence. The town's facade of peace began to crumble under the weight of these revelations. Yet, even as the truth emerged, Maya grappled with the personal toll. The threats never stopped, and the sense of isolation deepened. But the strength she drew from her brother's memory and the community's support kept her moving forward. The story of Darius Lee was no longer just about one man's tragic death. It had become a battle for justice, a reckoning with the past, and a challenge to the systems that allowed such horrors to persist. Brunswick's darkest secrets were finally coming to light, and the world was watching. The federal investigation into Darius Lee's death and the decades-old lynching case brought new hope to a town long mired in silence and fear. The FBI's presence was undeniable, a symbol that the truth could no longer be ignored or suppressed by local authorities. For many in Brunswick, it was the first sign of real accountability, though not everyone welcomed the scrutiny. As the FBI agents dug into the evidence, they uncovered a tangled web of corruption, intimidation, and complicity. The local sheriff's department had systematically covered up abuses, destroyed key pieces of evidence, and intimidated witnesses into silence. The vigilante group, long whispered about in private conversations and community gatherings, was real, and had operated with tacit approval from some within the law enforcement community. Several current and former officers were implicated in protecting and enabling the group's violent actions. Witnesses who had been too afraid to speak out before now found courage in the federal investigation. A retired schoolteacher recounted how, years ago, she saw men drag a black man into the orchard late at night. A former jailer spoke of threats made against inmates who tried to report abuse. Local clergy described the burden of ministering to families haunted by unexplained disappearances and suspicious deaths. Piece by piece, the narrative of systemic racial violence emerged. The FBI also reopened the investigation into the original lynching decades earlier. The archives revealed patterns of racial terror, intimidation tactics designed to maintain white supremacy, and the silencing of black voices in the community. It became clear that the orchard was a symbol of ongoing racial oppression, an unmarked graveyard for justice. In the midst of the federal inquiry, Brunswick's community fractured further. Those demanding change clashed with residents who insisted that dredging up the past only deepened wounds and threatened the town's reputation. Some families pulled their children from schools involved in the protests. Local businesses faced boycotts and backlash. The town hall meetings became battlegrounds where anger, grief, and fear collided. Maya Lee, though exhausted and often overwhelmed by the intensity of the fight, remained a beacon for those seeking justice. Her tireless reporting, combined with Mike Pearson's bravery in coming forward, inspired others to join the cause. Community organizations formed to support victims of racial violence and to push for reforms in local policing and governance. In response to mounting pressure, the state attorney general launched a parallel investigation. Charges were eventually filed against several individuals, including members of the vigilante group and law enforcement officials involved in the cover-up. The indictment sent shockwaves through the town, proof that justice, though delayed, was possible. The court proceedings were emotionally charged and closely watched. Survivors and families of victims testified about decades of pain and neglect. Darius's family found some solace in the public recognition of their loss and the official acknowledgement that his death was not a suicide but a lynching in modern times. The trial also exposed uncomfortable truths about systemic racism in small-town America, the ways power could be abused and marginalized communities silenced. It sparked broader conversations across Georgia and the country about the legacy of racial violence and the urgent need for reform. Beyond the legal battles, Brunswick began the slow and difficult process of healing. Memorials were established in honor of Darius Lee and the unnamed victims of the orchard. Educational programs were introduced in schools to confront the town's history honestly. Community forums encouraged dialogue between residents from all backgrounds, aiming to build trust and understanding. Maya returned to Chicago briefly, but her heart remained with Brunswick. She knew the fight was far from over. Institutional change was slow, and the wounds of the past would not vanish overnight. But the courage of one man and the determination of those who loved him had sparked a movement that could no longer be silenced. The story of Darius Lee became a powerful reminder: the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of rising. And when it does, it demands justice, not just for the past, but for the future. Thank you for watching this important story. If you found this documentary eye-opening, please like, share, and subscribe to help spread awareness about racial injustice and the fight for truth. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next videos. Together, we can stand against injustice and honor those whose voices have been silenced. Stay safe, stay informed, and keep the conversation going.